37th parallel on America's haunted highway, it's Pixelated Paranormal, your guide to the unusual and the strange.
Hey, what's up, everybody? We're back, and this is episode 343 of Pixelated Paranormal. I am Sean, and I have a bone to pick with carpet beetle larvae, but more on that later. With me, as always, is Preston. Preston, buddy, how are you?
Dude, I've had a fucking shit 2 weeks. Let's talk about, for all you cool ghosts and goblins, you crocodoons and crocodingos, you Skeletors, skelets, witchers and witches, especially you youngins who are not old yet, when your body starts falling apart, it really sucks. A couple weeks ago, I was in a lot of pain. Felt like I was giving birth to a kidney stone. I went to the doctor. I have 3 kidney stones in my left kidney, but I'm passing. I got one that's like 2 millimeters. Wake up in the middle of the night, feel like I have to pee. Go and pee, nothing happens. Lay back down, feel like I got to pee again. I pee, it burns. It's not driptic. Go to lay back down, feel like I got to pee some more. Burns again. I'm like, fuck, this is a kidney stone. Go to the doctor, and they're like, well, those stones are in the upper part of your kidney, and they're all passable. The biggest one's 2 millimeters. And I'm like, dude, the ureter is 1 millimeter wide. So that thing's going to hurt when it comes out. But I'm like, so what's causing me all this pain? Well, the CT scan shows that you got a log, like a big thick log, stuck in your intestines. So you're constipated. I'm like, well, why the fuck why do I feel like I got to pee all the time? Why does it burn when I pee? And they're like, looking and they're checking and they're like, well, your sciatic nerve is really, 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 really flared up. It's angry right now. It's like the Red Hulk. And when that thing is angry, it's connected to your bladder, it's connected to your prostate, it's connected to basically everything below the belly button. And so because it's all fucked up, your body's falling apart from the waist down. Here are some fucking muscle relaxers. Get the fuck out of my office. Then the wheel bearings in my truck go out. My truck's not that old, but
Now, that's not a euphemism for like your body, like your
no, that's
actual
literally
truck.
my fucking
Okay.
truck that's only like 2 years old. The wheel bearings go out. Take it in. They're like, what's up, boss? What do you think's going on? It's not my first rodeo. I got 7 inches of steel in my wrist and it's 20 degrees out. I ain't changing these fucking wheel bearings. I need you to change these wheel bearings for me. All right, we got to inspect it first. Hey, boss, after the inspection, you're right. Your front wheel bearing is shot to shit. The passenger side ain't much better. We're going to go ahead and change them. All fucking day sitting in the shop. I finally give it back. And they're like, hey, your truck is done, but guess what? The sound's still there. I'm like, what the fuck? And they're like, well, go ahead, take it, bring it back. Text my buddy. I'm like, what are the odds? I'm just asking that your company hired some dipshit techs and maybe, just maybe, they installed the wheel bearing wrong. Or the part that they got in was faulty. And he's like, it's one of the easiest jobs in the whole entire world. A child could do it. All day long. No phone call. And then right around 6:15, shop's about to close down. Oh, hey. So, yeah, we got your truck all put back together. Our bad. There was a locking ring on the back of the bearing. It's kind of a plastic piece, and that wasn't actually seated when we put it back together. So that sound that we heard and how you told us it was like really loud after you picked it up. I'm like, uh-huh. Yeah, that also shredded your axle. So, on us, we gave you a brand new other wheel bearing and a brand new axle. Fuck the universe. That's it. That's my rant. So, thanks for, hanging out with us for the first 15 minutes of My Body's Old and I'm Falling Apart and fuck carpet beetles.
Fuck carpet beetles. Well, I think I'm going to continue this energy forward. Preston, in the 9 years that we've been doing this podcast, both with the original channel stream that we had and the new channel, We've been pretty fortunate. We've had a pretty stellar rating across all platforms. But Pumpkin, did you look on iTunes lately?
No, somebody gave us a bad
Don't
rating.
don't look. Let me do it for you.
Yeah, lay this on
In
me.
9 years, I think we've received our very first 1-star Apple Podcast review, and I'm glad you're sitting down for this and you're having such a great week. From Cliffy Clavin. Oy vey, 1 star. Got about 19 seconds into my first episode listening to this podcast, and then Preston started talking for 10 seconds. I'm out. Can't do D-bags like him.
Ooh.
Fucking spicy.
What episode did you listen to? Clifty Clinton Nut Num Nuts? Like 10 seconds? Because I said, "Oh, what's up, all you cool ghosts and fuck you, dude. Fuck you.
Okay. It's all right.
Fuck
It's
you.
okay,
That's
man.
not even a legitimate 1 star. I'd rather have fucking Terry on YouTube that was like, I came here for the Bigfoot, not your fucking chili competition recipes.
Right.
Valid point, Terry. You can still go fuck yourself, but it's a valid point. I see where you're coming from. I get it. I feel you. But Clifton, go eat a dick. How about that?
Jesus.
Yeah.
Eat one that's like the one hanging on the Preston's wall back there.
Yeah. Go eat a fucking wooden dick.
Man, what can you do? Well,
Yeah.
shifting gears here. We got one big story for the day, and with that comes one big news story. This is a follow-up to something we covered, gosh, I don't know when, maybe back in 2021, 2022, somewhere in there. Anyway, here we go, guys. Angelo Pereira, a Wichita man who stole human body parts and fetal corpses when he worked at Wesley Medical Center and then sold them to Andrew Enisanian, who he met online, was recently sentenced last Thursday to spend 18 months in prison. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Middle District of Pennsylvania sought a 60-month sentence for Angelo Pereira due to the unusually heinous nature of the crime, but Pereira's attorney had asked for 3 months instead. Anywho, he pled guilty back in June to one count of interstate transport of stolen goods. Co-defendant Andrew Insanian of Montgomery, Pennsylvania, pleaded to the same charge the same day. A date for Insanian's sentencing has not been set. Pereira met Insanian on eBay and then communicated via Facebook Messenger. The sales happened somewhere between May 2nd, 2018 and July 17th, 2022, when Pereira worked at a pathology department at Wesley Medical Center. Facebook communications established that Pereira sold multiple fetal corpses to Insanian, as well as a partial foot, a human heart, slices of liver, brain, and kidneys, a spleen, a foot, intestine pieces, a testicle, a jar of toes, skin and fat, dried toes, and miscellaneous other organs. The transactions totaled over $5,000. First of all, Preston, how much do you think those body parts are worth? Because as I'm adding those up, I'm thinking to myself, this is going to be a pretty big transaction. $5,000 seems
I'm a
incredibly
douchebag,
low.
so I can't do math. I don't
Oh
know.
boy. Oh boy, your panties are in a twist, you poor fella. You poor fella. I just see you over there just stewing on your phone. Fuck you, fuck this, and I'm gonna fucking look up this guy on Facebook.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I'm a child.
Well, Pereira, who was 39 when he was charged in May, shipped the body parts through the United States Postal Service, and Insanian, who was 38, paid for them over PayPal. Court records say that Insania purchased numerous so-called quote-unquote wet specimens from Pereira, but don't say why he did. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, he was fired immediately when the hospital was alerted by law enforcement last year due to disturbing behavior by a former employee, which is a betrayal that all Wesley Medical Center represents. Anywho, Wesley didn't respond to additional questions, but as part of the plea deal, Pereira stipulated that the offense involved a loss of $6,500 to a total of $15,000 and agreed to make full restitution. Holy shit, dude. That's just absolutely bonkers. Court records say that this weighs in his favor that he admitted to his guilt upon being confronted by the FBI and who inquired about his trafficking. But since it was just a single customer, this also takes a little bit of the severity off the charges because had he been selling these things to multiple people, it would have been a hell of a lot worse. Multiple defendants have been charged previously in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and 3 have thus far entered guilty pleas. An additional defendant has been charged and convicted in Arkansas. So someone's thinking that maybe all these stories are somewhat related. I don't know. They haven't really come out with a full-on, conclusive results to say they're all together related. But fuck, dude, I don't know. Bonkers shit, but at least he got sentenced finally, huh? Well, let me ask you a question. Hypothetically,
Mm-hmm.
ethically, of course, in the sense of like morbid curiosity, and of course, again, ethically sourcing this, would you ever take like and purchase a human skull or an arm bone or like a preserved toe in a jar?
Fuck, why not?
Right? I mean, it's interesting, and I know our boy Lazarus, of course, he had a human skull cap that was like an ashtray, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it all borders on that morbid curiosity, of course, but getting into it here, this all
Like
segues into tonight's story.
on a side note, real quick. So talking about forensic anthropology, back in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, the practice was that you would go to like third world countries like India, Indonesia, and you would have people that would like die on the streets, and other like scientists and doctors or whatever could go and they could purchase those bodies. And there was this one college that in their biology department, they had a human skeleton, and it was a real human skeleton, but nobody like knew where it came from. So eventually the forensic anthropology department decided to like reconstruct the skeleton and like do 3D cast, and then they were able to get like DNA from it. And sure as shit, it was a like 23-year-old female from like Indonesia, and they were able to kind of like pinpoint the exact region from Indonesia that she was from, and they were able to like rebuild the skull. But that was part of the skeleton trade. So I always find like that dark part of history really interesting. Like that'd be cool to own a piece of that. Like I get it's fucked up, but that history and the story of that piece I think was really, really neat. So I'd do it.
Yeah. Again, I think ethically sourcing it and everything, I definitely would too, because I've always had a morbid curiosity about these things. But I'm glad you brought up that part about Indonesia and just the the body trafficking trade and stuff like that, especially for medical uses. It reminds me of that story of Poltergeist, the movie, when they used skeletons in the pool scene. And come to find out they were legitimate human skeletons, and they didn't tell the actress that, and it really fucked her up.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, pretty messed up. Well, that segues into tonight's topic. Preston, to kick things off, remind me, what's the weirdest thing you own? Do you have any kind of specimens, bugs on pegboards, fishes in jars?
I got this octopus tentacle in a skull jar.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So,
yeah, dude. Very cool. So I've got a pretty small but decent collection as well. I've got a mounted death's head moth, a really pretty metallic-looking blue-green beetle,
douchebag,
an octopus in a jar that Shayla got me. I picked up a coyote jawbone at a Curiosities Expo. I've got the infamous coffin bookshelf, and up until about 2 hours ago, I had a really nice Indonesian bat that was preserved and taxidermied and mounted. But here's my bone I have to pick with carpet beetle larvae. I didn't know this, but apparently carpet beetle larvae are these little maggot-looking caterpillary things. They're very small, maybe like 4 or 5 millimeters, and they kind of have stripes on their back. Well, anyway, if you get those in your house and you have anything taxidermied, these things eat organic matter, whether it's live or dead. And apparently, a couple of these little bastards set up shop in the chest cavity of my preserved taxidermy bat. And I haven't looked at that thing for months up close, and they have systematically eaten the contents of the chest, half of the bottom wing segment at the lower body, and just chewed that little fucker all to bits. And when I take it out of the frame tonight to see if I can kind of salvage it, the fur just crumbled off like a cartoon. So fuck carpet beetles, and any of you who collect taxidermy specimens, keep an eye on that stuff, because apparently these things, just like moths, will eat cotton from your shirts and other types of organic matter. So just fair warning. Anyway, we collect these things, oftentimes referred to as curiosities, because we think they're neat and morbidly fascinating, and because we can use them to aid our thirst for knowledge. The octopus I have in a jar that Shayla gave me as a gift, for instance, it's pretty rad sitting there on a shelf, but it's also really interesting to me because I have a very unreasonable fear, irrational perhaps, of octopuses and squids. And the fact that I have one in a jar, allows me to look at this thing and get a better idea of the anatomy and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's really interesting as a learning tool. But the idea of collecting body parts is far from new, whether it be for nefarious reasons or again due to morbid curiosity. In many cases, these are used for educational purposes, just like in tonight's story. To use as a learning tool, to gain access and understanding of how the human body works in the hopes of propelling humanity's knowledge of medicine and science, the human body has been used for many different reasons. See, back in the old days, let's say the 1600s, early 1700s, as the medical profession continued to rise and suddenly boom, in order to learn about the human body, you had to first be able to look inside the body, to see what's under the hood, so to speak. And because we didn't have MRIs and CAT scans and X-rays back then, the only real way to see how the human body worked was to cut it open, performing the old dissection. And we've all done this in science class, right? You probably got a frog dipped in formaldehyde, you cut it open, did your own little science project on it. Well, that's what we did back in the good old days. And once you've done the process enough yourself and learned enough about the human body, you want to spread the knowledge to others, as a medical professor, for instance. And if you're going to perform an educational demonstration for, science, only need a good old-fashioned surgical theater, but you also need a fresh cadaver, or several dead bodies. Due to a law passed, though, back in 1752, the only bodies that could be used in such demonstrations were the bodies of executed murderers. But as time goes by and the laws of execution changed by the end of the 1700s, the execution of murderers had swiftly decreased, and then, due to the Judgment of Death Act in 1823, the number of crimes punishable by death in Britain was reduced greatly as well. And suddenly, there aren't that many bodies for these medical theaters and anatomy classes to use. And in a time where there's nearly 700 medical students alone, each required to perform 3 medical dissections apiece of fresh corpses, we got a mass shortage of fresh bodies and a big demand. But have no fear, folks, because there's always a supply and a demand. And when we have this problem, people get crafty. And as luck would have it, there's a brand new occupation people could take up, and it's called the resurrectionist, aka Preston, the grave robber. But here's another problem, because people took it upon themselves to dig up freshly buried bodies to get the freshest of the fresh, to sell them to medical experts, because bodies weren't really well preserved back then. People took notice and came up with a pretty crafty way to prevent grave robbers, however, from digging up our loved ones, freshly deceased otherwise, and family members. You see, bodies were very, 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 very fresh, and they weren't preserved in formaldehyde, so you had to bury them much deeper. And they started using better reinforced coffins to prevent grave robbers from getting in there. And a lot of times people would even post up as watchmen to make sure for the first 2 weeks after a body was buried that some jackass wouldn't show up and try to dig up a fresh body to sell to Professor Johnny Hackemup down the street. We're talking about people staying up for 12-hour shifts overnight, true graveyard shifts. People posting up at entries to several graveyards and even building towers to keep watch over larger cemeteries. But the supply and demand continued, and these robbers got pretty crafty, and they came up with their own great ideas because, they were so brazen, and they also loved to make easy money. Grave robbers oftentimes would dig sideways trenches 6 feet under the ground, as far as 15 to 30 feet long, just to burrow up next to a coffin, crack off the top, tie a rope around the freshly deceased body, and then drag them back 30 more feet, to then throw them into a barrel and deliver them again to old Johnny Hack 'em up. Holy shit, it's easy money and it's sleazy money. Well, enter our heroes, or perhaps our anti-heroes of the story. William Hare was born sometime between 1792 and 1804 in Northern Ireland. He's described as a lean, quarrelsome, violent, amoral character with scars from old wounds from his head, on his head and his brow, a real brawler and street-smart fella who knew how to survive on his own. Hare spent his early years as a horse driver, until one day he got pissed off for whatever reason and ended up killing one of the horses that he was driving in a sheer fit of anger. So he got fired, and in search of a fresh start, he packed up and moved to Edinburgh, Scotland, and began to work on the Union Canal. And he met a guy named Logue Laird, and also his wife Margaret. Logue and Margaret ran a boarding house for transients, vacationers, and so on, called the Tanner's House, in the Westport area. Needing a place to live, Logue offered Hare a room at their boarding house, and Hare became fast friends with the Lairds. And then after a little time, Logue ended up passing away in 1826, and wouldn't you know it, Hare ended up striking up a romance with the widow Margaret, and the two got married. William Burke was born in 1792 and had a pretty decent upbringing, and even spent a little time in the British Army as a teen. Burke was the opposite of Hare, and was described as an industrious and good-natured man. He met a gal, fell in love, got married, and had a baby. But sadly, that marriage ended in 1818, when Burke basically packed up all his stuff and bailed on his family after having a particularly nasty argument with his father-in-law over land matters. So he, just like Hare, coincidentally found himself in
Said,
Edinburgh.
fuck him. I'll go get a new wife. I'll move down the street. They won't know.
Yeah. You got it. Love him and leave him, right? Well, he found himself, too, in Edinburgh, working on the Union Canal. Wouldn't you know it, the two men, both named William, met and struck up a pretty decent friendship. The construction of the canal finished up, and Hare, along with his wife Margaret, kept the boarding house going to make ends meet, and Burke ended up finding a brand new lady love of his life named Helen. Then he goes on to become a cobbler, making and repairing shoes for locals. Helen and Burke also have another source of income as hawkers. Basically, that means they collected and sold secondhand items, kind of like a mini Goodwill. But things get a little debatable here, and it's not really known what happens. But as fate would have it, Burke and Helen found themselves needing a place to live, and Margaret offered the couple a room at the Tanner's house. And again, the two couples become thick as thieves, and our story really kicks off. Now, the Tanner's house had a series of tenants, beyond just Burke and Hare and their ladies. One such tenant, on the evening of November 29th, a man named Donald sadly passed away. But there's a small problem here. Beyond the startling fact that one of their dear tenants had passed away, because not only did they now have to deal with a pesky act of calling in the death to the police and dealing with local authorities, but Donald also was 2 months late on his rent. So first they started rummaging through Donald's room, looking for items that maybe they could sell to make up the lost funds, but it didn't pan out because old Donald didn't have too many personal things, and he really didn't have any relatives or family that Hare or Margaret knew about. And that's when Hare had the epiphany. What if they simply sold Donald's freshly deceased corpse to one of those fancy-dancy medical schools down the street that were taking off so quickly? You see, Edinburgh was becoming the leading European center of anatomical study back in the 19th century, in a time where we as a society were really taking an interest in medical studies and anatomy. And in Edinburgh, there also happened to be a man named Professor Robert Knox. Now, Knox was an autonomist, which is another fancy word for a guy who was qualified enough to be a doctor. And back in 1814, he started up a medical sorry. Back in 1814, he started up a medical school. After contracting smallpox as a child, Knox was blind in one eye and badly disfigured. He undertook service as an army physician in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, followed by a stint in England and then again in the Cape Frontier War in 1819 in southern Africa. He eventually settled in his new home in Edinburgh back in 1820, and in 1825, In 1825, he became a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh, where he lectured on anatomy, where inside his surgical theater he demonstrated human dissection twice a day. And as his advertising promised, he offered a full demonstration on fresh anatomical subjects as part of every course of lectures that he delivered. And these things were popular, and his lessons drew over 400 pupils. So again, in short, Knox was a real medical badass whose work and demonstrations built up a formidable reputation for him as a teacher and a lecturer, and almost single-handedly raised the profile of the study of anatomy in Britain. And many historians consider that without Knox, the study of anatomy in Britain might not have progressed as it did. But anyway, presto, with great power of medical human dissections comes the great responsibility of needing a boatload of fresh corpses, or perhaps we should call them medical specimens.
Is he like Spider-Man?
Yeah, kind of, I guess, right? Just, one-eyed, kind of slightly disfigured Spider-Man. And even though it was highly frowned upon, remember, grave robbing and corpse nabbing was an off-the-record business that was booming. And rumors flooded the streets of Edinburgh that a fresh specimen could bring in top dollar.
It's like that story that we covered, I don't know, years ago. Mm-hmm. And was it Boulder or Denver, where they were building like a bypass, and the original town cemetery had to be moved.
Yeah.
So they contracted a guy to do it, and they're like, we'll pay you like 2 shillings per body. And so he's just like, get out the chainsaw, boys, and cut off a head, cut off, an arm. And then they're like, they ended up paying him like 10 times worth for body parts than what was originally in the cemetery. And then they were like, fuck, now we got to like put the puzzle pieces back together and figure out like, where does this arm go? Yeah. People are trash.
Yeah, dude, people are trash. Well, back to the financial dilemma of Burke and Hare. Knowing they couldn't recoup the financial losses of the dearly departed, freshly dead Donald, the poor old fella who has no known relatives, Hare devised a plan that he and Burke could pack up Donald's corpse and deliver it to the well-known local medical teacher, Robert Knox. But there's just one little rub to the plan. They already notified the authorities of Donald's passing, and there was already scheduled a proper burial. But have no fear, because Burke and Hare devised a plan, and later, once the body had been put inside a coffin and prepared for burial, they snuck in during the cover of darkness in the middle of the night and removed Donald's dead body and replaced it with a bunch of firewood. Then they rolled up to the back door of Edinburgh Medical University and offered Knox a freshly deceased elderly specimen. Now Knox, knowing that there was a short supply of fresh stiffs and that he needed as many dead bodies as he could get, just shrugged his shoulders, didn't ask too many questions, and paid the guys a handsome £7. That's like about $1,200 in today's currency. Easy, sleazy money, folks. And thus starts the dastardly new business venture of Burke and Hare. A month later, Margaret told the guys of another old sick tenant named Joseph the Miller, who wasn't doing too good. And then he became deathly sick. So Burke and Hare decided they'd grab a bottle of whiskey and visit Joseph in hopes of, raising his spirits, or maybe releasing his spirit to the afterlife. After they got Joseph good and drunk, and the room was buzzing with laughter, Burke and Hare grabbed a pillow and then descended upon Joseph. One of the men smothered him with the pillow, while the other lay across his body, making sure he wasn't able to breathe. And now they had their second paycheck in the form of another dead body to deliver to Professor Knox. This time the boys pulled 10 pounds. But now they seemingly ran out of old sickly tenants in the tanner's house and devised a new plan. And so Burke and Hare would go on to spend their late evenings hunting for victims and haunting the local taverns, looking for anybody who looked to be sullen, destitute, and weak, to which they might, take somebody home and perform the old Burke and Hare. And that's when they meet an elderly woman named Abigail Simpson. They hang out with Abigail for the evening, get her good and buzzed, and then finding that she has nowhere to stay that night, they offer her a room in the boarding house, because why not? They've got rooms for rent. Because isn't that a swell coincidence? Once the trio get home, they procure another bottle of whiskey, and they take Abigail to her room, did the old drinking pillow routine, and they accumulated yet another freshly deceased paycheck. And I guess Margaret took to the action as well, and she'd go out and help old Burke and Hare, and the trio would target lonely travelers. Margaret might flaunt her eyelashes and show a little skin, and then wouldn't you know it, they'd bring the victims, or people we should call them, back to the boarding house with the promise of a warm bed to sleep in and maybe another bottle to suck on as well. They'd check in for the night, and the boys would go cash a check in the morning. They become so efficient at this model that eventually Burke and Hare would be able to operate separately, even going out on their own, bringing home somebody on their own and taking care of the dastardly deed all by themselves. Because of how difficult it was, though, sometimes you just have to jump on the opportunity with a pillow. So there was no time to wait for the other guy to show up. Sometimes you had to take care of things on your own, and the boys got incredibly efficient. But that's not to say the business didn't come without its own pitfalls. Because every time they'd kill somebody, they'd make more and more money, and soon these two lower-class bums and their ladies were going on to dress more and more elaborately with nicer suits, nicer dresses, and suddenly it seems as though they're living large, seemingly out of nowhere. So people were taking note about where exactly the money was coming from. But just like most business ventures, the business of Burking and Haring people started to slow down, and the money began to run out. But fear not, because things didn't slow down too terribly long for both the boys named William, and on one fateful night, while they were out bar hopping, looking for their next victim, they ran into an old acquaintance of Hare's, a woman named Mary Haldane. Mary had actually been a previous tenant at the Tanner house before finally getting back on her feet and moving out. Now, being the opportunists that they were, after a couple of drinks at the tavern, they invited Mary back to the old Tanner house to catch up over a bottle of whiskey. One thing leads to another, and copious amounts of alcohol are shared, and they finally got Mary to pass out. And when they did the old smother with a pillow trick, lay on her chest bit, and Mary succumbed to the same fate as the rest of Burke and Hare's victims. And then they did the next step in their operation, loaded her up, and carted her off to visit old Professor Knox. But here's where things start to take an unforeseen turn. While up until now, most of their victims had been transient and loners, people without families or loved ones. But Mary Haldane just so happened to have a daughter named Peggy, who took notice that her mother had seemingly gone missing. So deciding to go look for herself, during her search, Peggy happens upon a local market owner who says, I happen to have seen that lady that matches your mom's description hanging out with the old Burke and Hare guys down there at a local tavern a few nights ago. So Peggy gets the address for the Tanner house and pays the owners a visit. And wouldn't you know it, just like her mother Mary, Peggy's visit to the Tanner house would go on to be her last stop on this earthly plane as well. Because when she arrives and tells Hare and his wife that she's looking for her mother Mary, who was last seen with Burke and Hare at a local tavern, being quick on his feet, Burke acted incredibly interested and invited Peggy in, over the promise of a stiff drink to calm her nerves, and he'd go on to share all the details they had about where her mother said she may have gone when she headed out next, after she left the Tanner house the morning following their drinking expedition. And if you guessed they got her good and ripped too, and then stuffed her body into a tea chest and swiftly delivered her dead corpse to Professor Knox's back door, well, you guessed right. All in all, their murderous antics would lead Burke and Hare to murder a documented 16 people, all of which they delivered to Professor Knox. But luck continues to run out. And after the events that kicked off on October 31st of 1928, they may have finally met their match. You see, whilst out and about, Burke happened upon an elderly woman named Mary Doherty one evening, who just so happened to be visiting from Ireland, and was looking for her son who had come to visit Edinburgh. And Burke pulled perhaps one of the most dastardly tricks to date in hopes of luring yet another victim. Noticing her accent matched his, he somehow convinced Mrs. Doherty that he was a long-distant relative of hers and invited her to stay with him at the boarding house so that he and his wife could catch up. There's just one small rub here, because just a few days before, Hare had happened to rent out the last available room to a couple named James and Anne Gray, who were traveling with their tiny infant son. But being the opportunist and again quick on his feet, Burke offered to provide Mr. and Mrs. Gray with lodging at another inn, free of charge, if they wouldn't mind giving up their room to Burke's long-lost relative. So the Grays say, sure thing, what the heck? And the next verse is similar to the first. They get Mrs. Mary good and plowed, and things go a little different this time, because Burke and Hare somehow got into a wrestling match. When Mary got up and tried to intervene, she got knocked down, hit her head, and passed out. And again, being true opportunists. You guessed it, they took the opportunity and presented itself, and they suffocated and killed her as well. But on this fateful night, the two murderous men named William were pretty hammered and decided they could probably just wait till morning to deliver the body, and they decided to lay Mary's corpse in between the wall and the bed of the room that they had given her for the night, and then just covered her body with some hay. Because that's what you do, I guess. Anyway, the next morning, the Gray family returns to get the rest of their belongings they had left in their room. You know, the same room that Burke just hid the dead body of Mary number 2 in. And in the effort to stall the Gray family from going to the room, Hare's wife, Margaret, offered to cook everybody breakfast, because why not? In an effort just to give the Williams a chance to move the body from the bedroom. The Grays sit down and begin eating, and then they realize that Mary from last night isn't joining them at the breakfast table. Anne asks where Mary is, and Burke quickly said that they had stayed up rather late catching up, but sadly she got really drunk and became kind of violent towards Burke. So they kicked her out in the middle of the night and didn't know where she went. The Grays shrugged their shoulders and finished their breakfast, and Burke and Hare excused themselves to quickly try and figure out how they could get Mary's dead body out unnoticed. But things didn't go their way, because no one had noticed, but Anne Gray had left the breakfast table and made her own way up to the rented room, and whilst looking around for her leftover belongings, she made the horrific discovery. Between the wall and the bed, underneath strewn hay, was the dead body of Mary Doherty. Anne freaks out, runs downstairs, and James fetches the police. But not before Burke manages to somehow remove Mary's corpse from the room. The police show up and search the boarding house, and luck has ran out because there was enough evidence at the scene of the latest murder to show the police something strange had happened, and police then knew mischief was afoot. Bop, boop, bop, the police do another investigation and discovered there's a fresh corpse delivered of an elderly lady at Professor Knox's medical school, and with the positive ID of Mrs. Doherty by Anne and James Gray, Burke and Hare are both arrested for murder. And thus Mary Doherty's body would go on to be the only one of the 17 that Burke and Hare sold to Professor to be spared from being used in a medical theater dissection. All in all, they'd go on to claim a total of about 17 lives, and were both sentenced to full trials and executions on Christmas Eve of 1828. But folks, things go a little sideways for old Berkey boy here, because Hare managed to strike a deal with police and sang like a corpse-smothering canary, and he struck up a deal. He'd tell them everything if they would just grant him immunity from prosecution. And that's just what happened. Hare was granted the king's immunity, and Burke was then sentenced for the murder of all 17 people and would go on to be hanged 1 month later, January 28th of 1829, in front of a crowd of nearly 2,500 people, because people still loved a good old-fashioned hanging. Hare would only spend a couple years in prison before being released and set free. But folks, the story doesn't quite end here, because fate, karma, or perhaps good old poetic justice wasn't finished with Turkey Boy. Next day after hanging, Old College, in front of a sold-out crowd, a doctor by the name of Alexander Monroe would lead a medical lecture where he used the deceased body of one William Burke to demonstrate a 2-hour dissection, where he would take intermittent breaks so each and every single viewer would have a chance to come forward and take a closer look at the body and the entrails of the infamous murderer, William Burke, with a number of the anatomy students taking ghoulish souvenirs, chunks of his skin. One guy even took enough to bind an entire book and make a series of card holders. And supposedly Burke's skeleton is still on display at Surgeons' Hall in Edinburgh next to his death mask and the life mask of William Hare. And that, Preston, is a story of old Burke and Hare.
Wow. I mean, this is a different kind of like a different take on serial killers, because usually, you think about serial killers, there's no rhyme or reason, right? Like,
I mean, there can be, but I know what you're saying. Yeah,
like
they're doing it for sport, not for money.
Right. Like, they're like, oh, I like the way people taste, and so I'm just going to kill all these people and eat them up and cook them. Right. Like,
Okay.
there's really no rhyme and like good reason behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, these guys, they were just trying to make a little cash on the side in times when times were bad. Like, you know, doesn't excuse it, but I mean, come on. They're just trying to make some cash, Just, science, we learn things. So, I mean, some good came out of it, I guess,
Yeah, I mean, it's just like World War II, man. Nazis were fucking horrible, but through the many experiments, you did kind of spring, the medical knowledge of the human race forward. So, there's something to be said about that. It's not right what Burke and Hare did. It's not right what the Nazis did. But, I mean, through a lot of this, we learned more. So the supply of the bodies did aid the human race in Burke and Hare's instance, and provide us with more medical knowledge. I love how delicious that poetic justice is.
Yeah, at the end there was some there was some poetic justice, and he got just what what the victims got. So I mean, that's kind of universal karma at the end.
Yep. If you want to watch a really fun movie, back in 2010, Simon Pegg and Andy Serkis released Burke and Hare. It's about an hour and a half long film, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of a autobiographical satire about the events, and I mean, from what I can tell, it's pretty well holds true to the story. But it's a good movie anyway. I'll always take me some Simon Pegg and Andy Serkis. But well, there we have it. Episode 343 in the can, buddy boy.
And we're gonna be streaming back to back because we got D&D tomorrow night for Group 1, and
I forgot about that. Yeah,
D&D Monday night for Group 2. So yeah,
busy times ahead.
Busy times ahead.
Yep.
But what do we cover next episode?
I don't know, man. I don't know if I'll get to it next time, but I've got a bunch of really great vampire books that John has provided us with, so we might split those up and start doing some nice deep dives into to vampires, because I know we've covered them before, but there's a lot of really great stuff out there with the new Nosferatu coming out recently. I need you to watch that one of these days, because I have some fun stuff to talk about with you about that, but not till you see the movie. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll find out what the topic will be next time when we show up next time, but we should be back on track for weekly episodes now the weather's done and your body's slowly recuperating and everything else.
Yeah.
But until then, if you're on the socials, give us a follow on Facebook. We are the Pixelated Paranormal Podcast. If you're on Instagram, we are at PXL Paranormal.
And if you haven't left us a 1-star review, go ahead. Might as well.
Don't do that. Leave us a 5-star. Leave us an honest review, but yeah, please do rate and review us. We're doing great on Spotify, so I appreciate that.
And if you don't agree with Clifton, that's okay.
I debated whether to even share that because I'm like, man, all Eeyore over here is going to just be in the dumps the whole episode. But that's all right, man. They just didn't stick around long enough for me to be a D-bag as well. So
that's right. So
awesome. All right, man. What do you got for me for dogs?
Look, if you need a beard, if you want a beard, apparently, if you want to grow a beard that doesn't make you a douchebag, you should go over to BigDobsBeardBalm.com and use promo code PXLPARA for 20% off your order. And pick yourself up some non-douchebag scents like Bay Rum, Fresh, Citrus, Mint, Classic, Sweet Tobacco, of Spartan. That's the new one that's really upped my non-douchebag game. I really feel like I've gotten out of the realm of Zach Baggins and all those other D-bags out there. And it's all due to Dobbs. And you can save yourself the trouble and use that promo code and get yourself some beard balm today. Yeah. And I'd like to point out that we do have 49 subscribers on Rumble who apparently like the content. We have 329 subscribers on YouTube. I don't even know on Spotify because I don't have access to that, but I'm pretty sure there's several, hundreds out there.
Yeah, we got quite a few on Spotify, man. Spotify does us pretty good.
Clifton, if you can see that middle finger on YouTube, double fist it for you, bud. How about that?
God damn. Well,
and to all of our new little buddies out there on Fallout 76 land, you motherfuckers, I don't think one of you have subscribed to the channel like you said you would have. All of them? Because some of them did. We've gone up 1 or 2 on YouTube from that. God damn it, do your job. Do your job. Go on there, share it with all your friends.
See,
or the next
crowd. These guys are not going to hesitate to go on there and leave even more nasty.
Oh, I know, but I enjoy it when it's the people that I like that do it because that's fuel to the fire. It's the douchebags that I don't know that are like, I can't believe I spent around 20 minutes listening to your fucking chili recipes. The fuck? What? Get out of here! Nobody likes you, Terry. God damn.
On a lighter note, in the Wichita area, stop by, see our friends over at Paranormal.cafe, and go by and see the dear Leslie and the rest of the gang over at CD Trade Post, Pawnee, and Seneca.
Yeah.
I'm going to lift this barrel-aged carrot cake stout and say cheers to the weird shit in the world and those of us that love to talk about it.
And I already polished off my bottle of water since apparently I need to cut back on energy drinks, so fuck it. Stay spooky and stay on the paranormal highway.
And send us some positive emails to cheer Preston back.
Fuck it. Whatever.
The cast at Pixelated Paranormal would like to thank you for listening to this week's episode. Pixelated Paranormal is here to tell you tales of the fantastical, the strange, the unknown. Tales that will move you a little further down the paranormal highway. If you'd like to share your own listener story, we would love to hear it. Email us at pixelatedparanormal@gmail.com. Again, that's pixelatedparanormal@gmail.com. We'd really love to hear from you. Again, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Pixelated Paranormal, your guide to the unusual and the strange.